attention, please take your seats and join me in a very warm welcome to Kaushik Basu.
Yeah. Thank you.
To begin with the beginning, to quote once more Bastian Ada, I wanted to ask you how it all began, how you came to economy, or how economy came to you.
Yeah, difficult question. Don't quite know. My choice of studying economics happened when I finished school in Calcutta. For a lot of middle-class parents in India, the best subject you can think of is physics or mathematics. So my father was pushing me to do physics or mathematics. This was 1969. Those were the revolutionary times where my preference was to do nothing. And it was decided economics is a sort of halfway house between physics, mathematics on the one hand and nothing on the other. And I drifted into economics in college. I came to Delhi. Then I went to London to study law. Was doing a little bit of economics on the side, and came under the spell of Amartya Sen and decided to make economics my discipline. That's really the short story.
And that already answers partially my next question, the question about your heroes or your inspirations. I read that Amartya Sen has been a mentor, has been an influence. What did you learn from Amartya Sen?
Well, before Amartya Sen, I should tell you, for me, the first sort of intellectual excitement was caused by my introduction to the writings of Bertrand Russell. So I treat that as the biggest intellectual influence for me. And some earlier philosophers like David Hume would be a huge influence. Later on, Noam Chomsky and people like that, but that would be much later. After those initial influences in school, it was Amartya Sen who was an absolutely spellbinding lecturer those days at the London School of Economics where I was a student. And that's what drew me in. And there was a lot of vacillation when I went into economics in the beginning, because it was a lifetime of being mentally more or less gearing up to becoming a lawyer. And I suddenly chucked it up all at one go and decided I would do economics and even more so be a professor of economics. And specifically, Amartya Sen's influence is not really the late Amartya Sen that you see in public a lot, but it is the early Amartya Sen who was the logician. And a lot of his work was really symbolic logic and mathematical logic, and that I found fascinating, and that's what really drew me into the discipline of economics.
You then pursued a very eminent academic trajectory in the US at Cornell. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this transition, because you made a very unusual move. As an academic, you went into government. How did this happen? You said Amartya Sen advised you to do it, that your mentor said that it's a good idea, but it's a very unusual step.
Yeah,
what prompted this?
I called him up, of course, to chat with him. This was 7th of August 2009. I was doing my usual summer in India, and I had planned, as usual, I would have gone back, and on the 8th of August I was going to go back to the US when I got a call from the Prime Minister's office asking if I would be interested in the job of Chief Economic Advisor. And I really fell back because I've just been an academic all my life. I love my life as a researcher, as a professor. It plunged me into a dilemma. Agonized over it, not for too many days. It did seem like a challenge like nothing I've had before. What pleased me was it did please me that they were asking me, but over and above that, what did please me is the sign of India's maturity, that India was asking someone who had had no experience in government to take up this post. Indeed, it is the case that the 14 individuals who have been chief economic advisors before me, all of them have had experience in government before taking it on. This was the first time that India was calling someone from outside of government altogether, and I was based in the US, to take this on. And I said yes, and on 8th of December I walked into the Ministry of Finance completely in a daze, because I had never been in a setting like that, but that was really the start of this new life.
And what do you think will game theory help, or to which extent is game theory a toolbox for this new position? Because it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by your interest and your pioneering work in game theory, and wanted to ask you to tell us about that. And
I really don't think there is a direct connection between between game theory and economic policy making. There are some connections. Game theory is all about reasoning. And I personally believe that really the faculty that is least used by human beings, and that is true even among policymakers, is the faculty of reasoning. There is a lot of that to be brought to public policy making, just good, clear reasoning, and game theory is all about that. It is, and there is one particular connection. I mean, game theory in itself is fascinating, so you don't really have to justify that in terms of its applications. The earliest works in game theory were literally analysis of table games, board games, like chess. There was the Polish-German mathematician 1913 who cracked a tremendous theorem on chess called Zermelo. It took off, and then John Nash, of course, is a celebrity because there is a film made on John Nash. I also had actually an early meeting with John Nash when he was first coming into remission from his schizophrenia. I had a fascinating meeting. All this drew me into game theory as a discipline.
What did you discuss with him?
This was 1990. John Nash was just getting out of some of the worst phase of his schizophrenia. I was a visiting professor at Princeton, and I and another visiting professor from Sweden, Jörgen Weibull, friend and a co-author of mine, we were fascinated by John Nash, who used to pace up and down in the yard of Princeton University, while we in the classroom would teach about John Nash. So we are teaching John Nash's concepts and works. The Princeton professors were used to him, so they didn't react to the fact that there was this man pacing up and down outside, whereas we, having come from outside, teaching his works and then seeing him pace up and down mechanically, we were fascinated. We called him, it was my friend Jörgen Weibull who worked very hard to contact him, and we had a lunch together. It was a very unremarkable lunch, I have to say, because he was still drifting off. While we were conversing, he would clearly drift off into his own thoughts. Only thing I remember, because there wasn't terribly much to remember, we chit-chatted a little bit, was I asked him the root of his name, Nash. And he told me something which I don't know whether it's the correct answer or just a clever answer. He told me, there's a Sanskrit word Nashika, which is the nose, and Nash comes from Nashika. He told me that. We didn't discuss game theory or anything like that. That's it really with John Nash, and by then the best of his work was behind him. That was the influence. You were asking me about game theory and policy, and I'll just make one remark. In crafting good policy, one very important thing to understand is other human beings are intelligent. They are also rational, so whatever you try to dish out, you are dishing out to a society of rational, intelligent human beings, and game theory is all about that. It's not good enough to be intelligent yourself. You must appreciate that others are intelligent, and bringing that to policy means you design policy better than you currently do.
And it's interesting about game theory, before we then move on more to your current role, I wanted to find out more about game theory, because I read about your models there's obviously herd behavior, there is bubbles, there is all kinds of phenomena of the financial markets which can be explained through game theory. And I was wondering somehow, because the Art Summit happens here and there is a lot of discussions about that possible extrapolation of game theory to the art market. What's your view to that? Do you think that these models have something useful to say about art markets and what constitutes value?
Art markets, I am interested in art, so I follow art, but I'm not really interested in the art market, so I don't follow the art market. But game theory does have something to say, not very directly, frankly, but you get these spurious spirals in price, which can happen for all kinds of products. You begin to buy something because others are buying that thing, and that is what gives it value, and you get price spikes. This happens with property. There are lots of historical examples where property goes sky high, and you're buying up property not because you want to use property, but because you feel others will want to buy, prices will rise, and so you buy. Art, of course, is full of this. There can be a fashionable name that comes in, and people begin to buy this person's work, and the price goes sky high. And then there are game theoretic analysis on crashes that take place, on prices which rise furiously. There is very good work by an Indian game theorist with a German-American game theorist, Dilip Abru and Marcus Brunnermeier, on these spirals which take place, which are in some sense false spirals, but propelled by one another's belief about the price of this object. Some interface with game theory, with art markets on this, but art market is not something that I have really studied, so I can comment on. Art does interest me, but not art markets as I do.
Yeah, because I read that you also pursue your own artistic endeavors and artistic projects. Can you tell us about this? You have also an art practice.
You know, I do draw and paint a little bit, but I have sufficiently refined taste in art to know that I don't paint and draw too well. I do it because I enjoy it, and I do an occasional book cover design and things like that. But I love to see art, and I believe I spot good art. So I go to Delhi College of Art every time they have their annual exhibition of young artists. And a couple of times I've spotted artists who I see a couple of years later, whose works have come in. So I think I have an eye for good art, and I actually track art all over the world. So wherever I go, any country, emerging economies especially, you get fascinating art from Ecuador to Mexico to China. I follow that art. I just love to see art. So really my art interest is that of seeing art, appreciating art.
Now it's interesting because one of my professors at university in Switzerland was Kaushik, and he was the shadow minister of the Prague Spring '68, and then went to exile to Switzerland and wrote the rest of his life about this sort of third way negotiation between capitalism and communism. And for a couple of months in '89, when I was at university, there were queues and queues of reporters from all over the world in front of his office, because for a couple of months there seemed to be a very big interest, global interest in the idea of a third way, and he was also a painter. But I was wondering if you could tell us more about the Indian economy and what you think are the most important issues facing the Indian economy now.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what I do all my time. This morning also I was working on this. You know, the immediate issue that Indians will talk about is price rise, and it's sort of round the clock you work on this. One mistake that people very often make is to believe that government is not concerned about price rise. In a democratic setup, nothing is of greater concern to a government than price rise, because that can bring down a government. That's the number one problem. Number two is India's growing very, very rapidly. It's really, India's growing at a rate which was unimaginable 20 years ago. When I used to be a professor in Delhi University, we could never think of India taking off the way India has taken off. But the income is not getting distributed well enough. So the large arenas of malnutrition and poverty in India is continuing. For lots of people, this is a question of just having the determination and you can correct it. But this is again where my interest as an economic theorist interfaces with policy, because of a realization that, you know, just having the passion and commitment to reach out to the masses is not good enough. You need to devise ways and means. At one level, it's a very hard engineering problem as to how you divert the massive growth, take away some of that from the rich and the better off, and direct it to the worse off. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's not just a question of having determination. It's also a question of design. How do you design to get it out there? So I would say that right now the short-term immediate problem is inflation. That will go away. But the longer-term problem, which is going to be a hard battle over time, is that this very rapid growth that India is having, that we can draw on some of this and divert a lot of it to the poorer sections of the population.
One other thing I read about is there have been many scams, political scams, over the last couple of months in India. And I was very curious, I mean, so much has been written about, but not so much about the economic ramifications of these leakages. So I was very curious how you see that.
You know, economic ramifications are there, but not huge, I believe. Yes, these scams are awful things, but not that they damage the economy in a huge way. Having said that, to me, whether or not they are good or bad for the economy, they are plain simple demoralizing. And no good society deserves to have the kind of political scams, the corruption scams that India has had. So at one level, I don't think it's as damaging for the economy as some people feel, but I feel it's damaging for society and for morale in a way that we ought not to tolerate this. And unlike inflation, where you can't quite pin down the source of inflation, it's a genuine problem where you don't know where to start. Corruption and political scandals, you can pin down where they are. And here I believe we ought to be very, very aggressive in attacking. India ought to put these behind, it should go behind us. Now it's time to get over with this. I just hope, in 1991 there was a big economic crisis in India, and the economy turned around when from this dark economic times we put in reforms to change. I like to believe that this governance crisis, political crisis will also give us the impetus now to turn that around as well, and hopefully we will look into a better future.
One other thing I read a lot about is this whole idea of the government actually to have a kind of a state role in terms of acquisition of land, for industrial purpose. And one project where this has led into a rather difficult zone is the nano project of this car. So it was a very strong backlash. So I was wondering what that means, and if this project of the government of kind of acquisition for industrial purpose continues.
As an economy develops, there's no two ways that you will have to move a certain amount of land away from agriculture, rural activity to industrial activity. In fact, we need to do this for agricultural laborers, because India is in this very curious situation where really a very small fraction of our national income now comes out of agriculture, but more than half our workers live off agriculture. There's no surprise that they are very poor. If you want to change this, you want to have manufacturing and industrial activity developing in rural hinterlands, for which you have to move land from rural activity to industrial manufacturing activity. The trouble with the nano project was, I think, that you have to move land is no two ways about that. But the Bengal government made one mistake. They looked at China, where huge amounts of land have been moved from agriculture into industry. They thought they will be able, it's a communist government in West Bengal, they thought they'd be able to do it Chinese style. Take a decision, move the land over. Not realizing that in India you have a vibrant democracy, you have a vibrant civil society, and you cannot do it the Chinese style. So you have to devise another way of doing it. So I believe that what we really need to do is we have to have a much better system of law which will specify the rules which have to be followed in moving land out from agriculture into industry, some kind of eminent domain law which countries from United States to Europe have used, and it's laws that have been used in democratic countries, where the farmers ought to be compensated not just by the price of land at that point of time, but by a large, much higher price which the land will come to command in the future. So they have a right to get some of the benefits that will come from the industrialization. So we need to have a much better law, but you have to go the route of drawing more land into industry.
I've got a few more questions about economic policies. I mean, one thing I was curious is if you could tell us a bit more about the way you see economic policies actually very concretely affect daily lives.
Hugely so. I was, before I joined government, there's a very beautiful line by the guru of my field, John Maynard Keynes, saying that in the long run, ideas are more important than vested interests. How people think, how you design things, so what goes on in our heads is more important than vested interests and people guarding their own property. Earlier, I used to treat this as a bit of a self-serving line by a professor, making a pitch for the professorial profession. But having come into government, that's my biggest lesson, that how you devise policies affects lives. One of the things that I've been extremely concerned about in India, I don't know how familiar you are, I know you're in the world of art, but I don't know about economics. We in India try to give subsidized food to the poorest segments of the population. There is a very free market economics fundamentalist camp that will say you don't want interventions of that kind. I don't share that view. I do believe that the government in a country growing as rapidly should give food directly to the poor, and to a large mass of the poor there should be direct food being given. However, how you try to reach this food to the poor is extremely important and needs to be designed well. In India, this is something that we have from very good statistical studies, that of the food that the government tries to reach to the poorest segments through ration shops, 70% of that wheat gets pilfered and gets sold in the open market. So the poor get 30% of the food which the government is, not the food, sorry, 30% of the wheat that the government acquires from the market reaches the poor, 70% gets pilfered out onto the market. How do you correct this? You need to redesign the system so that the scope for pilferage is much less. This is all to do with nitty-gritty economic policy, and I'm not going to bore the audience with that. But here you need good solid economic policy. If you do this right, people will get the poorest people who deserve to get subsidized food will get the food which they currently are not getting, or when they are getting it adulterated. But policy comes in, and good solid professional thinking. The way you need engineers to design a good aircraft, you do need good professional analysis to design a food distribution system. And I feel there are no two ways about this. You need the passion and the commitment to first want to do it, but then you need good design to be able to deliver on this.
I have a last question, and I wanted to come back to the question about the future and ask you about the future. I was wondering where and sort of what direction you think India goes in the next 10 years, and also how you think actually the relationship of India to the world will change.
Yeah, well, most of the time I say that I'm a skeptic, so I say I don't even know about the past. So when you ask about the future, I have even greater difficulty. Broad expectations would be that India is going to integrate more with the world. The growth will continue. I do believe that within the next couple of years, not per capita income, China is way ahead of us on that, but India's growth will probably overtake China's in the next 3-4 years. So over the next 10 years, it's going to be an economy that is going to be growing very, very rapidly. It is also a very materialistic time for India. It happens actually, I think, when economies grow. I remember 2 years ago being in Beijing and in Delhi, and in both places, the thing that struck me was the sheer materialistic drive. I hope that the world of art, the world of culture is going to temper that materialism. I mean, it's a much better society if that kind of materialistic mood gets tempered, and also you build a better society. So what is bound to happen is that this economism which is driving the country right now will continue. I think India is going to become a much bigger global player. It's already a pretty important global player. I hope that art, culture, music, literature is going to flourish much more, so that some of this energy, which is the mad driving force for just business and enterprise, gets drawn out of that into the sort of enterprise which will in the end create a better society than just a society with a higher per capita income.
Kaushik, Basu, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure talking.
Thank you.